When ExxonMobil was not adhering to supervision and safety policies, it led to the Exxon Valdez oil spill. This oil spill obliterated the surrounding ecosystem and resulted in the implementation of laws and the tightening of regulations for oil companies. In 1981, James Woodall, a Coast Guard commander in Valdez, Alaska, suggested that the Coast Guard's radar system be improved because more glacial ice flows were predicted to appear in the following years by the U.S. Geological Survey. The Coast Guard had been decreasing their budget to cope with the money they lost in President Reagan's war on drugs. As a result of that, they did not agree with Woodall's recommendation and called the extra radar sites cost-prohibitive. In 1986, Steve McCall took over Woodall's role as commander and chose to downgrade the radar system. Perhaps the original radar system would have been helpful in guiding the Exxon Valdez in the right direction and saved it from hitting the two reefs on March 24, 1989. The night before the oil spill, the Exxon Valdez left the port of Valdez at about 9:15 p.m. under the command of the harbor pilot. Their goal was a 5-day run to Long Beach, California to deliver oil. Once they were clear of the port, Captain Hazelwood took over, and the harbor pilot took a pilot boat back to the harbor. At 11:53, Hazelwood went to his cabin one flight of stairs below the bridge, which left the third mate and the helmsman by themselves on the bridge. This was a conflict because Hazelwood was the only person of the three who had clearance to be navigating the boat in that area. Before he left, Hazelwood told the third mate, Gregory Cousins, to make a right turn when the ship was across from the Busby Island light and skirt the edge of the ice.
Judging by our radar, I will probably divert from the TSS and end up in the inbound lane if there's no conflicting traffic. Over.
Cousins called Hazelwood 2 minutes later to say, "I think there's a chance that we may get into the edge of this ice." Captain Hazelwood raced to the bridge just after midnight when he felt the shutter of the boat hitting the first reef. At 12:04 a.m. on Friday, March 24, 1989, the Exxon Valdez collided with and grounded on Bligh Reef in Prince William Sound.
We fetched up on the ground and evidently leaking some oil.
The oil immediately started to spread. Less than 4 hours later, 138,000 barrels of oil had escaped into the bay, and 20,000 were being lost every hour. By 5:30 p.m., about 240,000 barrels of oil were lost, and the oil had spread more than 18 square miles. The Exxon Baton Rouge was tied next to the Exxon Valdez the next day to transfer what was left of the oil between the two boats. Meanwhile, Frank Iarossi, the president of the Exxon Shipping Company, was working on getting a permit to burn the oil that had escaped. On Sunday, March 26, Commander McCall got the approval to use oil dispersants. Oil dispersants are chemicals used to break up oil and spread it through the water. This created conflict because dispersants are only useful in certain conditions. For the past 3 days, the waves in Prince William Sound had been less than 3 feet high, and the wind had stayed below 15 knots. Ideal conditions for an oil spill. But that night, the weather started to change. The winds picked up to 25 knots. On Monday morning, a blizzard came tearing through the Chugach Mountains. In Prince William Sound, 20-foot waves were sighted. The oil created a frothy mixture with the sea and started to head southwest with the wind. By that time, the oil had moved 40 miles. A few weeks after the spill, a conflict appeared when the ecosystem around it started to change. Animals appeared on the shores completely saturated in oil. Many of them were dead. Otters, sea lions, whales, and multiple species of birds and fish were just a few of the many animals affected by the spill.
There were otters that were completely coated with oil. Surf scoters were sitting there. Their throats had been ripped out by gulls that had seized opportunistically on these birds that could no longer fly.
Whoa, look at that. Something's been eating it. Look at that. It's got a hole in it. The eagles have been after it.
There were birds flapping in the water that couldn't get airborne because of the oiled feathers and such. It was truly a horrific scene.
50 to 80% of the bottom-dwelling creatures died. The death toll was estimated at 250,000 seabirds, 2,800 sea otters, 300 harbor seals, 250 bald eagles, up to 22 killer whales, and billions of herring and salmon eggs.
So this rock is teeming with life. You have kelp, crab, you have barnacles, snail, you have mussels, You have barnacles on those mussels. This is part of a food chain that we are part of, and it's not 5 years after the spill, it's 26 years after an oil spill.
Cleanup crews arrived on the shores of Prince William Sound to spray oil off of the rocks. One of the oil dispersants that was used was Corexit. Corexit was great because it had low toxicity and was approved by the Environmental Protection Agency and the Coast Guard. Another conflict was aroused when environmentalists and activists jumped at the chance to criticize the oil industry. Ricky Ott is a marine taxonomist and activist who participated in Exxon's legal case. She lived in Cordova, Alaska during the time of the oil spill.
We fly out Orca Inlet, we come around Knowles Head, and conversation just stopped. I mean, here is this incredible scene. The sun is just starting to come up. It's an amazing scene. And flat calm, down on the water surface is this blood red tanker in a black inky stain. And above it is this cloud of bluish smoke. And we're flying along, and all of a sudden we're into this smoke. It was like instant headaches, instant nausea. And so we flew up above it, and then we just circled and circled and circled. We're 9 hours after the wreck, and there was not a speck of promised recovery equipment on the water. This had all been promised within 6 hours, and we were 3 hours past 6 hours, and nothing.
During Exxon's legal case, she was a spokesperson for the fishermen and others affected by the spill. She also helped draft the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. In the end, 11 million gallons were spilled, which is equivalent to 125 Olympic-sized swimming pools.
Look at that. I just flipped over a rock and touched the bottom of it. That's what dirt looks like. Watch this. That's not dirt. It's oil. Smell this.
Wow, it smells just like gasoline.
A few hours ago when the tide was high, we watched hundreds of salmon swim right over the top. How would you like to eat a fish that swam over a bed of oil?
There were 3 trials called phases. Phase 1 would decide if the spill took place because Hazelwood, Exxon, or both were being reckless in the operation of the tanker. Phase 2 would decide how much money was due for the damages to the fishermen and others who had suffered from the spill. Phase 3 would determine if Exxon, Hazelwood, or both would have to pay punitive damages, and if so, how much. Phase 3 was dependent upon Phase 1. If Exxon and Hazelwood were both declared not guilty, then Phase 3 would not be necessary. Another compromise was the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, which was put into place as a result of the spill. The hope was that a spill of this magnitude would not happen again. It allowed the Prince William Sound Regional Citizens Advisory Council to be created and required tankers to have a double hull. In 2010, Prince William Sound was revisited by the New York Times. They dug 6,775 holes and found the dangerously toxic oil in most of them.
So this is an oil zorb that we took off the boat, and it is designed for oil to cling to it. So if you dip it in water, it will come out white. If you dip it in oil, it will come out black.
While the Exxon Valdez oil spill was a devastating event that damaged the ecosystem, affected fishermen, and hurt oil companies, this conflict has created compromises by bringing awareness to the importance of oil safety, tightening regulations for oil companies, and bringing forth more careful and deliberate procedures.